Hey guys, Darren Carr here, Coach of Wise Pods, and welcome back to the final episode of this short series where we are talking about player positions. On today's episode, we will be talking about the tricky forward line, where for the majority of the preseason, we've had 4 of the 6 positions locked out with some highly talented players. But with recent news, our forward lines are becoming much more diverse. So really consider this video as your one-stop shop for all your forward line needs, as we'll be discussing all the fantasy options that you need to consider for your starting team. So let's get into it. So let's just jump straight into the players that we need to discuss today. There's a lot to get through, so we'll try and do this as quick as possible. So I wanted to sort of start with the locks, first of all. I think we all know who they are, so I wanted to get them out of the way pretty quickly so we can get into some more unique picks. So we'll start at the top. The most highly owned player of 2025 so far, that is Bailey Smith. He is nearly 70% owned. He should be 100% owned, but I just imagine the 30% is always going to be automatic teams that may not select him. So he is just an absolute lock. We all know he's going to be going into this major CBA role at Geelong. He's probably going to be sat alongside the likes of Danger and the likes of Holmes. And at his price range of 58, we've seen this guy go 104 in the past. So he's just ridiculously underpriced. So it's easily to say he's 30 points underpriced at the moment from his starting point range. It's really what his ceiling is going to be. You could easily probably think he can push into into the hundreds because he's been a 104 guy previously, but I'd probably put a cap on him a little bit, just given that he's obviously moved from a really good fantasy side in Western Bulldogs, and he's gone to Geelong, who really like to be a bit more flexible in their players. You know, that their top averaging player last year was Max Holmes, and he only averaged 94. So they really don't have that player that they hugely rely on to get the ball and get those fantasy points. So I've got a bit of a cap on him to probably average closer, just under that 100 at this point in time, but I'd be more than happy to be proven wrong. We're all going to have him anyway, so it doesn't really benefit me to say he's not going to average 100, but I still think he'll be top 6 easily. Probably just not F1 for the year. Yeah, like I said, top 6 locked in. So it's just really what's his ceiling going to be, and he's just one you want to start in. So lock him in. Caleb Daniels, probably the easiest selection for me. I think he's going into the most cushy role that you could ask for in fantasy. We've seen the likes of Zeeble, Halls, Sheasels, Kurt McKerches, Fishers, and Powers and whatnot of the world all playing this sort of role and absolutely rack it up back there. So I have no doubt that Caleb Daniels is going to be, probably 100 to 105 averaging player. I just think, he's shown in the past that he can be quite good at a fantasy game. He's averaged 94 back in 2019. Obviously, again, come from the Western Bulldogs, which is a bit more of a fantasy-friendly team, but North are also very fantasy-friendly, particularly in this role. So I have no doubts that he's going to be absolutely killer and just needs to be one that you lock away in your forward line for the season. So get him in your side there. Move on. I also think Caleb Daniels potentially going to be at F1 for the year. Obviously, I think he'll probably push close to that 105 average. So I with that average, you'd think he'd be F1 unless someone else can beat him, which would be probably this next guy is definitely potential to do that. Jack McRae, priced at 71, so a bit more of the price here of the X-Dogs. Moving to St Kilda, again, moving from a very good fantasy side to another really good fantasy side in St Kilda. So really, I'm not seeing any downside on that. He's going to be playing a full CBA role, so full-time in the mid alongside Jack Steele. And we've obviously known how good Jack McRae can be. He's been a 120 averaging player previously, and he's had multiple 110s previously as well. So the ceiling, the limit, the sky's the limit for this guy, really. If he can get back to his fantasy best back in those days, which was only, 2019 or something like that. So I 100% believe he can break over that 100 average quite simply. He's a really low injury risk as well. He's been a very consistent player. I don't think he's missed many games in his career at all. So maybe I've jinxed him, but hopefully not. I think he will be good to go and probably one of the easiest locks in our sides as well. And again, fantasy community agrees with 54% currently owned. Like I said, if he receives 70% CBAs, he just has to go over 100. I don't see a world where he doesn't. The only downside you could say is that Jack Steele already averages over 100 in the team, but we see a lot of teams have two inside mids averaging over 100 these days. You got Brayshaw and Sarong, Butters and Rosie are just good examples at the top of my head at the moment. So I think there's absolutely scope for Jack Macrae to go over 100 as well, and he probably even takes some points off of Jack Steele while Jack Steele isn't as popular this year. So I think he would be that in and under player, get the ball out, and also be able to spread around the field and get some plus sixes as well. So really bullish on what he can do. So lock him in your side in your forward line for the year. He will pick up midfielder status at some point as well, which would be pretty nice for some flexibility, but I can't imagine he's going to go into our midfield at any point. But just flexibility is always nice to have. The only question structurally is, can you afford to just go Jack Macrae as your F1? A lot of people, I'll just throw a few players in there for now. As example, a lot of people are looking at the structure of going Jack Macrae at F2, and they're really struggling for that F1 option. Whereas you could also just put him at F1 and be pretty comfortable. At the end of the day, I'm pretty confident that he'll become a captain option. You could probably even say the likes of Bailey Smith and Caleb Daniel will also be captain options when you think about it. So I'm not afraid to start with Jack Macrae at F1 if there's other guys that I'm more confident in at a lower price, which we'll get into a little bit later. So something to consider there. I have no preferences either way. There's some guys ahead of him in price, or there's some guys below him that could also be quite juicy. So no issues either there. The last guy I wanted to talk about, which was a lock, and that was Matthias Philippou, who unfortunately has come down with injury with a stressed fracture in his leg, so he will be missing the first probably 2 months of the season. So unfortunately, he's not one that we'll start with, but it was one that we'll be keeping an eye on through the season. As he comes back, he'll be a nice cheap upgrade for us around that sort of week 6, round 7. So definitely want to keep an eye on. Obviously, we're assuming he's going to have this major CBA role behind the likes of Steele, Macrae, and maybe even a Windhager there. We just seen the scores from last year where he went 117, 93, 96, and 119 in his 4 games as a full-time midfielder. So he could average pretty close to 100 as well, but I'm probably putting a limit on that with the likes of Steele and Macrae ahead of him. Can't have all 3 of them averaging 100, but I think he could probably push closer to 85, 90, and be that third midfielder in there for them. In terms of trading him in, when we get to there, it's probably not a bit early to be talking about trade-ins, but my preference is always going to be wait a week, confirm the role, confirm his fitness, and then jump on him the next week. He's not going to go up that much in price in the first week, and more than likely he'll spend minimal time on ground. Like, he'll have not his full time on ground, just to sort of work his body into an actual AFL game. So he may even come through the VFL, so we may even get it a bit later on. So one to keep in the book for later on. I know a lot of people know about him, but I just want to talk about him in the locks. So that's the 4 locks out of the way. Now let's move into the premiums. So I don't have too many premiums out here. Realistically, I'm looking at that top 6, and I only see maybe 2 of them staying in the top 6 for the season. So we'll start with Dylan Moore, and obviously priced at 92. He is just a fantasy gun, considering the role he plays and the way he scores about it. So to say that he is the number 1 forward and doesn't get a lick of CBAs at all, it just shows that he can rack up the ball no matter what. He's just a genuine small forward, minimum CBA usage, and he just can rack up the ball. The thing about Moore that interests me slightly is that he had a really slow start to the season last year, where Hawks were really bad. We all know that they started like 0-5, and they were getting slapped for probably the first 6 or 7 weeks of the season, and he really didn't get a chance to score up forward. So the thing that's intriguing is that in the second half of the season, when Hawthorn were really at the top of the game, they were obviously moving forward a lot quicker. That really freed up Moore's game style. He averaged 101. So that means he is 9 points of value potentially on top of what he is now. Now, in terms of his role, I don't see anything changing there for them. They've pretty much got their 4 small forwards locked in. You've got Connor McDonald, Ginnivan, Wizard, and then Moore as that fourth as well there. You probably have Connor McDonald and more likely on the wing, which is where they get most of their points by spreading the ball when they're coming out of D50 and catching it and getting that +6. So really bullish on what he can do, and I still think he'll be top 6 for the season. The only problem that I see is that they've got a pretty tough early run. I'll show you that here. It's not as bad as you think, but it's not great at the same time. Like Sydney round 1, I can't imagine he's going to have a huge start away. Essendon and Carlton aren't great, but Carlton can be pretty restrictive. GWS are the most restrictive for general forwards. It's hard to sort of tell if he's a general forward or key forward, but either way, it's not great. So just something to keep note of. He does also have the round 4 bye, which isn't the worst thing when you consider he potentially has some value, but it's not the greatest bye because it's further away. It's the last one you're going to have. So something to consider, but probably not likely to start. He is 12% owned right now, so it's not out of the question, but probably not for me. I'm not looking to pay out for these sort of guys, especially because he's probably going to be on the lower end of top 6. If he was going to be, top of that range, maybe top 3, I'd probably be a bit more bullish and jumping on it. But because he's going to be on the cusp of top 6, in probably 4 or 5 or 6 that are out there, maybe I'm not willing to pay out for him as much. But again, probably we'll have to trade him in throughout the season because he will be top 6, you'd think. So keep an eye on, look for good runs. The next person is much more highly owned, and that is Jason Horne-Francis, priced at 90. It's an interesting selection, as like I said, he is quite highly owned, and you'd be inclined just to jump on it because everyone else is doing it right. Like I said, a lot of people are struggling with this F1 option in front of McRae, and a lot of people have just come to the conclusion just go to Jason Horne-Francis because you think he's going to be a pretty stable F1 option. When you look at his average and what he's been able to do, you think he's probably going to be top 6 for the year with his 90 average and potentially has some upside with a decent run. There's been rumours that he's potentially going to be playing a full-time midfield role. I don't know how much I believe that just yet, given everyone's playing a midfield role at this point in time. You need to play 6 midfielders at this point in time. So I'll wait until I see it. But even if he does have this full CBA role, I don't think his upside is going to be massive. Like I said, Butters, Rosie already averaging over 100. Butters at 106, and Rosie's going to be at like 102 or something like that. I don't think we've ever had a side that has 3 midfielders that have averaged over 100. I could be wrong, but I don't remember it in my time of fantasy. But I think the Western Bulldogs have been close with the likes of Bontempelli, Libba, and Treloar. But not from recent memory. I can't remember that. So I'm less bullish on what he can do. I also think that he is a little bit overpriced at this point in time. You got to think back when Rosie was injured throughout the year. Horne-Francis really bumped up his average. So he went 113, 112, 80, and a 99 in that 4-week stretch where Rosie was out, which is well and above over his average at the moment. So he's probably 2 or 3 points above of what he should be at this point in time. I just also see him as this sort of 90 guy. Like that's sort of what I thought he would be, a couple of years ago when I started him. So I just don't see a world where he's going to push that close to 100. But I do agree that he's going to be a top 6 forward for the year. So I can understand the point of just going, okay, he's going to be top 6, lock him in, and just be comfortable with it. He's going to be a stable and safe option at F1. So I don't mind that as an option, but for me, I'm looking for some value in someone that can push that barrier and be closer to him at a much cheaper price range. Like if I can pick someone that's priced in the 70s or even lower 80s that can push that 90 and be a lot closer to a Horne-Francis, then that's still a win because I'm not losing that many points on him, but I've gained cash in the process. So we just really got to look for that option. I know a lot of people are struggling with that. Also, note I wanted to mention is when you're looking at top six, you're probably locking in Daniel, McRae, Moore, and Smith probably ahead of him at the moment. So he's going to be that lower end of top six, I would have thought. Unless you're really bullish that you think he can push, 100, 105. I don't see it, but I can understand why you do. So it's really about how you see it in your eyes. So that's the reason I haven't selected him. I'm not. He hasn't been on my side all season. I just don't think he's going to be as a consistent player as what we want. He has had a floor of 49 there and a high average of 141. So he's very fluctuate. His scores fluctuate quite heavily. For someone that does have a lot of CBAs. And his CBAs don't always correlate to high fantasy scores as well. Like he had scores in the back end of the season where he had pretty much full-time midfield role, but he didn't score like a full-time mid. He was down at 60s or something like that. So I don't think he's one that automatically more CBAs means more points for him. Yes, it means he's going to be around the ball, but it doesn't always mean that he's going to get the ball. So he's definitely one I want to watch in the preseason, but I'm still going to need to see a fair bit before I start him, unfortunately. Now, that sort of does it for the premium. So I could, brush on Brent Daniels and stuff. I was pretty bullish on him to start the season, but he's very highly priced, and he's probably very unlikely to get much CBAs at the Greater Western Sydney. They've got a lot of guys that can run through there, so it's very tricky. Plus, the early buy is just too much for me, I think, at someone that price. So when you're considering they're a premium, my general rule, don't pay out for them if they've got the buy. So that pretty much rules out Moore and Daniels. So not looking at Myers, not looking at any of the tall forwards, and not even looking at the likes of Mason Wood. I'm just, don't know why. Just not someone that's ever really interested me. I don't think he really presents any value. So staying away. Moving down into the underpriced premium. So these are the guys that are sort of on the cusp of that top six, and have shown potential to be that next best player, but really aren't quite there yet. So they need to show something. They need to improve somehow in the season to get there. So the first player we need to talk about is Luke Parker. Now, he's becoming more and more interesting as the season goes on. Obviously, preseason, not many people are looking at him because he is quite highly priced, given that he only averaged 66 in the last season. But he is priced at 82, so that's a bit of a red flag already, but he only played the 7 games last year, and with the news of Georgia Wardlaw being out for the first 2 months or so for the start of the season, there is a lot of speculation and match reports coming out saying that Parker is that next person to jump into the midfield role. You got the likes of LDU, Sheasel, and then you got Parker that's going to be that third. You could probably even say he's going to be that second player with Sheasel playing a bit more forward. So that opens up the possibility of him being a top 6 to start the season. We've seen this guy be a pretty consistent 90 to 100 averaging player for many seasons. He's obviously 32, so he's had a pretty long career where he has done a pretty long summary. I could probably even just show you it. I don't know how much I touched on him previously. Luke Parker, he has even pushed into the 100s previously for us as well, so this was way back in 2016 though, so I wouldn't be expecting that, but he's been a pretty consistent, high 90s guy for majority of his career. Only recently dropped off as more injuries have crept in, and he's been pushed out of that midfield a little bit more. But if he can get 70% CBAs for the start of the season, absolutely he could be a pick for us and can put 10, 15 points on top of his head, on top of his price range right now, and be that guy for us. So it's really just how does he have a limited upside? When you've already got LDU, we've been talking a lot about these midfielders, and only 2 of them probably averaging over 100. You've got LDU, who's probably just a solid 90 guy at this point. I think he's 95 to 99, somewhere around that point. I haven't officially checked, but last time I checked, he was around that price range. And then you've got a Sheasel, who seemingly is a 110 guy. There is speculation whether he comes back a little bit this season with a different role, but are we really expecting all 3 of them to be around that sort of price? You could say yes, because they are quite a fantasy-friendly side. But with them only improving, do they lacked that a little bit this season. It's definitely an interesting one because he could be that guy, but you got to temper your expectations a little bit. And the other thing that worries me is that he has the potential, once Wardle is back in, say, 8, 9, 10 weeks, whatever that's going to be, then he instantly goes back to this 50-50 role forward. And we've seen at the back end of last year, he averaged 64 or 66 in his games. So it's not amazing. So he'd instantly probably be a forced trade out at that point because he is so highly priced. So you'd have to move off of him in the time that you're meant to be upgrading your side as much as you can. So it would be taking like 2 steps forward and 1 step back at the same time. You know, you're improving your side, but then you're having to take the step back to move on Parker when he isn't in that main role. But who's to say that he doesn't, you know, have much better scoring output when at North Melbourne as that half forward mid. You know, they're a much more fantasy friendly side, in my opinion, than the likes of Sydney. So he could be, you know, closer to that 80 average as that 50-50 guy in the forward line. So it's definitely one I want to keep an eye on. I do need to see it in the preseason games that are coming up very shortly. So definitely keep an eye on him. He is definitely becoming more of an increasing juicy pick. So keep an eye on that one. Isaac Rankin is the next one, priced at 80, and is someone that a lot of people are looking at. Like, he's over 10% owned at the moment, so... And the way I look at it, a lot of people think he's going to increase his CBAs a fair bit this year and become a bit more of that Petrarca sort of idea, where he sends 50% time mid, 50% forward. I don't see that happening. I still think he's going to be predominantly used up forward. Like, his role will stay pretty consistent. You'll get probably that 30% CBAs, where he's just going to be that explosive mid that gives him a bit of pace every now and then. But it's not going to be a constant thing that they do for him. I don't think that's something that they want to rely on. And they have so many other guys that can do that for them right now. They've, like, I don't know how much I touched on it previously, but Dawson, Crouch, Soligo are probably going to be the main 3 guys in there for now. But then you throw in the 3 guys that they recruited in Neil Bullen, Pete Ling, Cumming. Throw in Berry. You can throw in Laird that can go in there if they were to go there. Rankin, you got to throw him in there. Even Rochelle. So they have so many guys that can run through that midfield that can give them that explosive nature. So it's not all just going to be reliant on Rankin. They have so many other people that can do it. So I'm probably less likely to pick him just because I don't see a huge amount of upside in him. Like, when you're selecting someone in the underpriced premium, you probably need to put probably 10 points on their average right now to be a worthwhile pick, to really push into that premium category, to be that borderline top 6 line. So he's 10 points away from that right now, I would say. So where are those 10 points going to come from? I just don't see where they're going to come from in my eyes. I could see him pushing 85, you know, just with natural progression of him another year in the system. And the Crows expected to probably improve this year with a few more recruits. That could lead to more opportunities for him to score up forward. So I do see a world where he does that, but 10 points just through that is a bit of a stretch in my eyes. So it's one that I'm not highly looking at, but and a lot of other people are. So he does have a nice run to start the season, but again, probably not enough upside for me. And I think he's going to be very up and down in his scoring. So one to keep an eye on, but probably not for me. The next person in this category is Liam Baker, and he is becoming a very increasingly interesting option to me. I wasn't super keen on him at the start of the season because, as a lot of you guys know, I am very against these sort of Mr. Fix-It guys like your Kennedys, your Bakers and whatnot, that can be played in any sort of role at any given time when there is issues. And we know how often issues come up, injuries happen every single week, so it doesn't take much for, you know, the coach to speak, okay, we need a hole that needs to be plugged. Liam Baker, go play this forward pocket role where you're going to get 5 touches a game, even though you're probably one of the best players in the team. You know, that's just something that we regularly see with these sort of players. So I wasn't super keen on him, but since he's overcome his injury to start the season. He had a bit of I think it was a hamstring injury just coming off the last season. So he's overcome that now. He's now playing in match simulations, so starting to see what his role is. His role is now confirmed to be a halfback distributor, which we all know is the best fantasy scoring role at the moment. It's the new sort of trend. So that makes him a bit interesting because we've never really seen him in this super fantasy friendly role previously. Like he's showing times where he's played halfback and played full midfield role and even other roles here and there, but never consistently and never one that's quite as juicy as the one he's about to be in. So it's hard to say what his ceiling is going to be in a nice role. So, but what we do know is that he needs to at least put 10 to 15 points on his price range as it is current now to push top 6 and be a worthwhile pick for us. So do we see 15 points for him to do? You could argue yes, going into that role, you're looking at likes of Duggan that's probably done that previously, and probably not many others have done there. The other thing that probably works in his favour in my eyes is that 2024 West Coast Eagles were historically bad for fantasy scores. Like, they were the worst that we've probably seen in a long time for fantasy. Like, they scored 1,360 points as a team overall each week, whereas a lot of other teams are averaging 1,500. So that's 140 points less than the nearest team, pretty much. And even the top teams are scoring 1,600. So that's so many points that they're just missing just because they're not getting their hands on the ball and they're not, holding onto it as much as what they probably should. So, and even when we were back in the other old format where they only played 22 games, they didn't score this low. So it's something that they have to improve on in my eyes. They have to improve on that area. They've got some new guys in now. They're going to be a bit more competitive than what they have previously. And they have to improve on this area. So that probably means that as a team, they're going to have a few more points to share around. And they're going to and I think Baker can be a big beneficiary from that, as a major beneficiary from that improvement. So I do see a world where he can probably push 90s. I just want to see him push 95, if not close to 100, would be very nice. So I do need to see the role. I do want to see it in preseason. I'm probably going to say that a million times this video, but yeah, he's definitely one that's coming into my calculations a lot more late into this preseason. No early buy, decent price. I think the run's okay. I'll have a quick look at that in terms of a general defender. I think he's going to take a fair few kick-ins as well, which will be nice. He'll have to fight over McGovern there as well. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Who's he play for? West Coast Eagles. So he's got Gold Coast, Brisbane, Fremantle, GWS, Carlton. So very up and down sort of run to start the season, but probably on the harder side, I would say. So it'll be one that we'll have to keep an eye on. So keep an eye on that one. The next guy is a big pod, and that is Connor McDonald. If you watched my Hawks video, I was quite hot in McDonald, and he spent a bit of time on my side. That has since changed a little bit because I got a little bit of cold feet, but he went next level last year when Hawks went really good in 2024. Playing a very similar to a role on the other half forward, like half forward flank, using his speed to spread and take a lot of marks deep in the wing when transitioning from D50. So he's pretty much another more, but probably has more of a fantasy cumulative ability in my eyes. He's always been a pretty good fantasy guy. He's been a gun in the VFL as a full-time midfielder as well. So he does have that ability to rack up the ball. So he averaged 88, including a very poor 39 in the semi-final against Port. So removing that score, he scored 93, which makes him a potential 15 points value. So that's where I can already see statistically that he has upside, and a lot of it if the Hawks continue the way that they were trajectorying, pushing for top 4, top 8, whatever you want to say. They're going to be a lot more competitive, and that means that there's going to be more points for him up forward. I think he's best 22 no matter what. The only question I have is if the likes of Ginnivan and Nick Watson are going to bump up their averages at all, and he becomes that sort of third, fourth forward up there. When you're talking about major stars, you're putting Ginnivan probably up there first, then Moore, and then probably the Wizard, unfortunately, after that one season. He's got a lot of X factor. So he does automatically become that sort of fourth small forward for them. And that does mean he could potentially on the cusp every now and then. So it is a bit more of a risky pick, but definitely presents some value. Round 4 bye does hurt. So it is one I want to consider, and one I'm still pretty confident that he could be a top 6 player for us. He'll be there or thereabouts by the end of the season, but probably not enough to lock him in to say he's guaranteed to be there. So paying that sort of price as a person that's not going to be getting CBAs and not going to have a guaranteed ball roll around the ball and guaranteed they get those points. Like Hawks could just have a bad day, and that could mean he could drop a stinky 39 like they did in the semi-finals. So it's going to be very up and down, but I think throughout the entire season he'll be pretty good. So I don't think many people will pick him, but definitely one to keep an eye on. He may be one that we need to bring in throughout the season. Matt Kennedy is the next one. And he is on the decline with fantasy coaches at the moment, as it looks like he will be the 5th midfielder behind the likes of Bont, Libba, Richards, and Standers to start the season. Obviously, we know Treloar is out injured for the first little while, so Sanders is just absolutely burning up the track at the moment, so he has just slotted in front of him a little bit. So, but we'll have to wait and see. At the end of the day, they still need 6 midfielders at the moment to play, so he is still playing a lot of midfield time, but there's a lot of speculation that Sanders will be ahead of him. So I still just see him as that Mr. Fix-It, when they need a to fix a hole, whether that's half forward, half back. He's just going to be that guy because he's shown he's been able to do that at Colton for many years. So it's just a little frustrating because he could have been such a nice pick for us at that price. No early buy, pretty good run. He's averaged 94 in the past for us, so that's already, 15 points of value, if not a little bit more. And in the right role, he can absolutely be a top 6 player for us. So it would have been nice if he had a quite high CBA, but I think it was always pretty unrealistic that he was going to get that role with the team that he went to. So that was the disappointing thing because, looking at the stats, his scoring really depends on what role he has. When he has less than 30% CBAs, he averages 71. This is from last year's data, by the way. When he had 30 to 50% CBAs, he scored a 91, and when he had above 50%, he scored a 106. So he averaged 106 in those games. So it shows you that his CBAs he relies on them a fair bit to get fantasy points, just to be around the ball, be a tackler, be that sort of defensive mid at the same time. So it would have been nice. He could have been a lock if he was going to the right team, but unfortunately he's gone to one of the harder teams to break into, especially with a bit more talent coming through as well. So probably on the back end of the list now, in my views, unless preseason changes my view on that. We'll have to wait and see. But it is a pretty high price tag at that to pay up for someone that's not going to have a guaranteed secured role. So not for me at this point in time. Another guy that I'm not super high on, but I think it's good to mention is Jai Simpkin. At the start of the preseason, it was is it going to be a Luke Parker or is it going to be a Jai Simpkin as sort of that 4th midfielder in the north side, behind the likes of LDU, George Wardlaw, and Sheasel? It seems like both of them were going to be spending 50% time forward and midfield, whenever one of the main guys was resting. So, but now with Wardlaw out, he's going to continue to be that 4th player, but he's obviously behind the likes of Luke Parker. And speaking of guys that heavily rely on CBAs, Jai Simpkin's one of those players for sure. So I think he's probably going to fade a little bit this year, probably average around 70. If you look at his scores from last year where he didn't have as many CBAs, he just didn't score very well, probably around that 60 to 65 range. So I think he'll have some pretty big games where they rely on him as a midfielder in there. Again, he is the captain of the side, so they will look for him a little bit, just that captain bonus that they do. So he's one you want to keep an eye on, but probably unlikely to start, I think, for me. So I'm fading him at this point in time. He did go 88 in the back end of last season, so that's particularly why he's in this category. He can push the top 6 if given the right role, but it's very unlikely at this point in time. Now we're moving into the mid prices, which we really need to see a significant bump from them. You're talking 15 to 20 points, if not a little bit more, to really be that worthwhile picks that can get you off to a flyer. If anything, there'll be good cash generators and be good points on field, but probably not keepers for the season unless they can be absolutely massive. We've already taken a fair few off the board with a few of those locks. The likes of McRae, Smith, and Daniel all would have been in this category, so this category will be a bit smaller than normal, but yeah. To start off with, I'll just keep moving down here. Where is the first one? Sean Manor is the first one on my list here. I didn't look at Shea Bolton just because he's injured and he's going to be playing a full small forward role, so I don't think he's one I'm looking at anymore. But Sean Manor is definitely one that I want to keep an eye on. We know he's such a fantasy gun. When you look at his VFL numbers, he just racks it up. He's a mature age player, so I wouldn't be surprised if we see him in the midfield at some stage through the season. He had some time in there last year, but they're predominantly playing him as a small forward at this point in time. So I really need to see something in the preseason to say, okay, let's jump on him and run the risk, because he is priced at 750. So it would take a fair bit. He did have a few sub games last year, which makes him a little bit points of value. So that makes him 5 points of value at the moment. So he can push closer to 80. But again, probably needs to put another 10 on points on that to be a worthwhile pick in my eyes. So we just need to see something. I don't think there's anything in this current role that he's in that can improve. He's behind the likes of Myers. That is probably that main guy up there. So I don't see that improving much. He really just needs to get into this CBAs, which behind the likes of Danger, Holmes, and Bailey Smith, also throw in the likes of, Stewart could go in there every now and then. Blitzarves are still around that side. Cam Guthrie, if he's ever fit, could also go in there. I just don't know if he's ever going to get in there, unfortunately. As much as he could be a fantasy god for us, it's one that I want to keep an eye on, but probably unlikely to start unless I see something significant. Moving along, a lot of these other players we're just going to skip over. Jack Graham is the next one that is increasingly more interesting this season. So, wasn't 100% sure what role he was going to play at West Coast, coming across from Tigers. Sort of a underappreciated Tiger man, I guess. So wasn't really aware of him as much as I probably should have been, but he is going to be playing a full CBA role at West Coast Eagles, especially with a lot of their injuries at the moment, with the likes of Yo out for an extended period of time. Harley Reid's also battling an injury, so he may not be in there as much. Sheed, if he was even in consideration, is also out for, I think, the season actually, with an ACL. So there's a few spots missing in there. So I think his role is pretty much guaranteed to be a full CBA in there. It's really just what his upside can be. If I just have a quick look at what he's scored in the past, he has been okay. Like, he hasn't shown a huge fantasy output, but he's been, close to that 80 range previously. So if he can push that 80, it's still a pretty good pick at his price range of 65, and that's still 15 points of value right there. So definitely one I'm going to keep an eye on. Hopefully he can flourish in that role. Again, probably relying on the likes of West Coast Eagles improving on their points distribution, just because they need to really bump up their players individually. And with the likes of Tim Kelly in there already taking up a fair few points, and then you're throwing in a few other players, and maybe a Hewitt, who we'll touch on soon, and whoever else may go on there, he really is going to make sure he has enough points. So one to keep an eye on. Let's go back to the homepage. The next person is the big one, and that is Riley Sanders. I don't know why he's not favorited, but he is 656k, 20-year-old, coming into his second year. Got absolutely bevered in his first season in the AFL, only playing the 14 games, even though he is an elite talent. being a very high draftee. Now that, with a few injuries and now that Bevo has removed the likes of McRae, Smith, and Daniels, there has to be a permanent 22 spot for him in this side. And while it may not always be a full CBA role, which I'm expecting him to start in with the likes of Treloar out injured, I still think he'll play a lot of this half forward wing sort of role and push into the stoppages, which still means he's going to be around the ball, be around the stoppages, and be able to increase on his fantasy output quite significantly. I see him being an 80 player quite simply, even in that role, with the potential of pushing sort of 90, 95 in the better role as a full-time midfielder. So pretty bullish on what he can do, and he's probably one of the more easier selections. A lot of people have jumped on him since the likes of Philippou jumped out, so he's up to 28% now. VFL scores are elite. We've seen them. He's just an elite accumulator. He's been doing that since his draftee days, so I just think he's going to be quite simply a player that is just going to go up in value. Maybe not be a keeper for the year, but probably be close to it in the right role. It would just be interesting to see when the likes of Treloar comes back, what happens to his role and how much he decreases for us. So, yeah. The other thing that gave me a bit of confidence is that he had a couple sub games in last year when he had less than 50% game time. I removed those scores. He averaged 70, so that's already 6 points of value. So it already shows that if he plays full game time, he's 70 points. If he plays in a better role, he can probably push 80s, if not 90s, in the best role possible. So really, really excited on what he can do, and probably one of the locks in my side at this point in time, and one you should be considering. From now, I'll probably just write in the names because they get quite cheap from here. Jack Martin is the next one I just wanted to keep an eye on. Geelong are really good at using these rejects from other sides and just turning them into absolute weapons. So we're looking at Stangle there as one. So keeping an eye on him, see what he can do. He has been a pretty decent option for Carlton previously. So yeah, one I want to keep an eye on. He's priced at 42. You can probably just throw the dart at the board and blindfolded, and it'll probably stick if he's playing. So yeah, one I'll keep an eye on, but probably very unlikely at this point in time. Merrick is another one that I've put in the mid-pricer category because he is priced over 400k. He is moving into the backline for the Eagles this year in 2025. Now, I assume it's going to be a intercepting role. I don't think he quite has the body for a key back defender replacing the like of Barras back there. So I don't think that's what he's going to do. So that intercepting role could be quite fruitful. We've seen the likes, if he can play very similar to the likes of Sicily, not to say that he's anywhere near the capability of Sicily, but if he can even show a glimpse of that, he's probably can push 60s, 70s quite comfortably. So probably expecting the ball to be down there a fair bit, as we know. So meaning more points for him. Priced at 41, you can probably throw it at him and something will work. So it just matter what his upside is. One I want to keep an eye on. I need to see it before I just jump into it. So keep an eye on that one. From there, we'll pretty much move into the rookies. If I can go into that. And I'll start with the likes of Jack Hutchinson. He's one that I wasn't fully aware of until a few other podcasters mentioned his name. I think Chris was actually the first one that mentioned him on the Fantasy Fanatics podcast. Priced at 385k, played the 7 games last season after being a mid-season pickup, so he did play a fair few of those games last season. Just looks like he's got the body to play AFL currently. Looks like he's probably going to play a wing role for them, with maybe some CBAs here and there. He's still obviously a second-year player, so I don't know how much reliant they'll have on him as in the CBAs with a few other names in there. So I'm probably a little bit less bullish on what his upside is. Didn't show a huge amount of fantasy scoring. We don't really have too many known about him just yet. He's only spent half the year in the system, so isn't too much data to go off. But he averaged 46 across his 6 full games. There was one game where he was a sub, so I did remove that. So Mees is a bit of value, but not anything significant. One I'll be keeping an eye on in the preseason, but feels like it's more of a natural progression sort of for me. He was playing in this half wing role last season, so I really need to see a bit more upside than just 46. It's only 8 points for a player that I'm paying up for. I'd probably rather just take the lower risk and pay for a basement player that has much more upside. So there's that one. Keep an eye on him, but unlikely at this stage for me. The most popular one is Elijah Hewitt. He is in 50% of teams so far. He is highly expected to play as a full-time midfielder this year, or play near enough to that, maybe 70-30 sort of split forward as well. He is a third-year player. He missed all of the 2024 campaign with an injury or multiple injuries, so he has a full discount of 30%. Makes him a lot of points of value here. Like I said, battled with foot injury to start the season before requiring surgery. Then he suffered some bone stress here and there that saw him miss the rest of the season. In terms of his scoring ability, he averaged 46 over 14 games in that year. 3 of those which were sub-affected. Removing his a 53, I do think he'll be a bit better than that this season. So I think he can probably push 60s, 65s in that sort of role, being in that CBA role. Easily his best 22 in my eyes. Some people speculate if he's even going to be there, but I just think he will be. So his 20 to 30 points comfortably in my eyes. So he's just an easy lock. Put him at EF6. So that. The only concern is that he's still on a modified program, at least as far as I'm aware. He could be past that now, but he was on a modified program to start the preseason. So I wanted to keep an eye on. Hopefully he's fit, ready to go for the season. And probably pretty much need to see him through the practice matches to confirm he is a lock in our side. So keep an eye on that one. Isaac Kaku from the Essendon is another one that I think is just seemingly going to be a lock for Essendon's best 22. He's absolutely lighting up the track with his talent and X factor, especially when you're considering the removal of Jake Stringer. There is a spot there for him, and he's a high draft pick as a small forward. They typically get a lot of time on field to start off. Looking at Nick Watson last year, taking it pick 5 or whatever he was. Akaku is very similar, so he will spend a lot of time in there for them. May not have the hugest fantasy output, as generally most small forwards don't at the start, but he did average 67 in the under-18s league and 81 in the talent league and 67 in the under-18s championship. So some fantasy output there. Probably expecting more of 50s, 40 to 50s in the AFL though, just because it is a much harder league. So he's probably a bench lock for us. I don't think I'd trust him on field, just given it will be 40s to 50s, and could it be even lower every now and then. So there's that one. Daniel Curtin is another one that is highly owned at the moment, 34%. He is priced down at 300k after only playing 7 games last year, being a high draftee. He just looks like he's going to take a half-forward role for the Crows. He's got the big body ready to play AFL games. He's been training well in this preseason, shown some decent fantasy output in the ASNFL. So I think he can push, 50s, 60s as well for us at that lower price. Probably another bench option for us, but wait and see. He could even play a little bit of CBAs, but I think there's a lot of other guys that can play in there before him. Then we'll start to move into the very cheap guys in likes of Joe Berry from Port Adelaide. He is another small forward that has a lot of talent, so I think he'll be a lock for them as well. I think Robbie Gray was the one that specifically selected him, so they rate him quite highly, so I think he's a lock in their side, and he'll be one that starts round 1. Again, high drafty small forwards, so get a bit of time in there. Did average 66 in the under-18s and 69 in the talent league. Realistically, again, small forwards typically just score between that 40 and 60 range, so that's what I expect of him. Probably a slower burn at his price range, but could be one that gets away pretty early if he has a decent run, which Port do. So it'll be a toss-up between whether I go Berry or whether I go Kaku to start the season, unless I can find someone else that can not play the small forward or key forward role. A couple other names I wanted to just quickly mention were the likes of Harry Armstrong. He's a tall forward for Richmond. We know the likes of their tall forwards is pretty diminishing, especially if Tom Lynch goes down, so he could potentially get a lot of games to start the season, along his teammate Fully, who isn't on this list. Where is the next one? He's priced at 9. I can't find him. Give me a second, guys. Why can't I find him? No, never mind. Who cares? We'll move on. That's pretty much about it, though, guys. There's a few rookies in there that we need to consider. Hopefully, a few more pop up their head in the preseason. There's not a huge amount of upside in those guys, but realistically, it's back to the structure in terms of things. Like I said, do you run McRae at F1? Do you run a rookie on field? Ideally, you probably don't. At the most, you'd probably just run a Hewitt, I would say, at F6. That's what a lot of people's structures are going to be like. In my opinion, I think it's probably the minimum. I wouldn't be comfortable with any other guys on that field, like a Berry or a Kaku. Daniel was probably questionable. Hutchinson, if he plays the right role, could be, but very unlikely. But yeah, generally that's sort of what the structure is going to be. I think there's a few other mid-price guys that can go on there, like a Baker, like a Graham, and those sort of like. So keep an eye on that. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed this short series. Hopefully you found out something new about the updates on all these players. But what's sort of be happening, I guess, from here on out, the preseason content is going to continue. The practice matches start this weekend, so that is very exciting. Our first glimpse of football. All the preseason content has been leading up to this point where now all the speculation can be put behind us and we can actually look at it on field and look at what they're doing in an actual game that they're going to be practicing, what they're going to be doing for the season. So that's really exciting. I will be producing a video about that next week, about the first half of them. I think they're going to be playing 4 games in the first half. So yeah, in the first half this weekend, and then again the week after that. So there'll be 2 videos about the preseason practice matches. I'll also be releasing a team reveal later this week, just to give a bit of an update on where my thought processes are in terms of how my team has changed in the last 2 months after doing all the research or all the players that I've been doing. So I'll give you a bit of an update on that one. So stay tuned, subscribe if you are keen to see the next bit of preseason, and hopefully you're keen to see some footy as much as I am, because it has been a long preseason so far. So yeah, I'll catch you guys in the next one, and take it easy. Bye.